said, everyone, please remember to mute your mics. Okay, hi everybody, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about editing across neurotypes, getting on the same page as your clients. So this is aimed at editors, but it kind of expansive beyond that. So even if you're not an editor, welcome. I hope this is helpful. I mentioned this a little bit while we were casually chatting before, but the font I'm using in this presentation is called Open Dyslexic, which may be easier to read for dyslexic viewers. So without getting too heavily into it, it's weighted more heavily on the bottom than the top, which helps eyes keep it from twisting and brains keep it from twisting. The first letters tend to be bigger than the following to help orient the sentences and things like that. It's not fully proven to help, but any little bit that might help, hopefully, yes. Okay, so get into the slides. All right, so me. Hi, I'm Laura Burge. I go by Literary Laura online and in my business. I have been doing fiction editing since 2017, and I have been an editor in general since 2010. I'm an advanced professional member of the CIEP, which is UK-based editing organization, and I'm a member of the EFA. I am a fiction editor, done a little bit of nonfiction, but really primarily fiction, and I work with publishers and independent authors, and I've worked on more than 100 books at this point. And I'm also a writing coach, so I help authors who are struggling with starting, finishing, or revising their stories. On the neurodivergent side of things, I have ADHD, the inattentive type, and plenty of anxiety to go around. I work with neurodivergent clients. I'm a speaker on neurodiversity for conferences and events like this. Hi. And I'm the creator of an upcoming course called Reducing the Barriers, Helping Neurodivergent Writers Through the Writing and Publishing Process. Now that's aimed at people in the publishing industry who may or may not have knowledge about neurodiversity, but hopefully will increase the knowledge. And I'll include a link to that at the end of the presentation in case you're interested in learning more. Okay, so this is a little bit more about me. This is, I've got several of these Let's Get Personal slides because I think not only the tips and tricks of working across neurotypes is important, it's also a very personal thing. It's personal for me, it's personal for a lot of us, having grown up experiencing this and wanting to understand others who have different experiences. So when I was little, huge imagination, brain, thoughts everywhere, going everywhere all at once. When I was 8 or 9, I was diagnosed with ADD. At the time, it was called that, and struggled a lot with all of that, with school, with that kind of structure. At the time, what they believed and what they knew was, here is a pill, this will fix you. And as I think a lot of us know, that's not actually how it works. So I really struggled with that growing up and fighting against how my brain worked. Even though my brain does all these really cool things, this huge imagination, makes fascinating connections, I get a whole lot of fun out of it. And eventually I became a fiction editor after working as an editor at a website and founded Literary Laura. And at a certain point, I realized that people were really struggling to even get to the point of needing an editor. And so I did the research and the studying, and I became a writing coach for people struggling to get to that next stage, and found so many of them, like me, even with my own personal writing, struggles with all these things. And part of it is being neurodivergent. And of course, part of that is that a lot of standard writing advice just isn't tailored for us. So, okay, now we're going to dive into the idea of neurotypes. So a neurotype is a way to describe the different way that brains are wired. So we'll go into a couple of different examples. There are so many more than I can list. But basically, As an editor, if you're an editor, you might be neurodivergent, your client could be neurotypical. You might be neurotypical and a client might be neurodivergent. More specifically, an editor could have ADHD and a client can have ADHD. I'm going to get more into that in a minute, but even having the same diagnosis or same self-diagnosis, you still could be at kind of a crossroads where you don't totally understand what the other person is saying or how they're communicating. Editor could be autistic, the client could be dyspraxic, editor could be dyslexic, and the client can be a stroke survivor. This and so much more, right? Different ways of working together. So what kind of problems can come from this? Miscommunication all over the place, misunderstood expectations, either for the communication, the services provided, or even within the text itself and what the writer wants to convey. Hurt feelings, that absolutely comes from miscommunication and misaligned expectations. And as neurodivergent people, there's a whole lot of rejection sensitivity that can come along with it. It's not fun for anybody. And you end up with this mismatch in need and style. And sometimes you just won't be the right people to work together, and that's okay. All right, so here's my next Let's Get Personal slide. I called it the ADHD Manual of Two Very Different Styles. You may notice that I had maybe a little bit too much fun naming the Let's Get Personal slides, but that's just me. As I mentioned, I have inattentive ADHD, and sometimes I've noticed when talking to people with hyperactive ADHD, they might be talking a lot and getting really excited and into things, and my brain might be going somewhere else, and we just miss each other entirely with no ill intent on either side, and a total intention to work together and communicate with each other. But without some additional levels of, oh, can you repeat that? Or I'm sorry, I'm focusing in now, we just miss each other. Okay, so this is when I'm getting into the subtopics that we'll be talking about here. The ABCs of improving the relationship and workflow. So first of all, ask questions. That's always helpful. Both of you should be comfortable. Always communicate. That underlies so much of what I talk about. Don't assume. That gets dangerous. Expect compromise. You just can't always be able to work exactly the way you want to work, and they can't necessarily always have exactly what they want to have. Find differences within the text. I get really excited about this topic, but the text itself can be different. And finally, and very, very importantly, guard your own boundaries. Okay, so the first one, the A, ask questions. When it comes to communication, working with your clients, lean into asking questions sometimes instead of just making statements or assumptions. Oh, I see a note that someone can't see my screen. Can others see it? Okay. Hopefully all is well. Hopefully, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, someone can't see it. Okay. I hope that gets worked out. All right, I'm gonna let you do that. Download the Gather software, okay. So yeah, so some communication things that you can ask. It sounds like you'd like weekly progress updates. Is that correct? Because if you said it and they didn't acknowledge it, or they said it and you didn't acknowledge it, or someone mentioned it and you weren't sure if that's what they meant, just getting that, yes, that's what I wanted, and that clarification can be really helpful. It could be something like, I noticed you haven't responded to some emails. Would you prefer for me to send you a WhatsApp message with questions? And we'll get more into like communication preferences in a bit, but absolutely. But you know, it's important to know if they don't like email, or they just really, really struggle with responding to emails, and it's not you, it's not personal, but finding a different method is a really good way of figuring that out. So once we get into the edit side of things, as I mentioned, I'm a fiction editor, so some of this is going to sound very fiction-based. Some of it is more expansive. So this one's a little more fiction-based. If you might say, the emotion in the scene jumps suddenly for what seems to be a small incident. Is this the intention? Is this part of the main character's character? So instead of potentially assuming, this doesn't make sense, this is a huge jump, nobody acts like that, which I think a lot of neurodivergent people can really understand. It can be a very frustrating kind of feedback. Instead say, this is standing out to me. Is this what you wanted to do for this character? Is that on purpose? Because that, when it comes down to it, it's all about the author's intention. And this is a little bit more like copy editing side of things, more expansive, but you're using a lot of parenthetical asides in this chapter. Is this an intentional style choice? And again, it's about intention. Is that what they want to do? Is that part of the voice, part of the style, part of even like house style guide, depending on who you're working with? Okay, so another let's get personal, the telltale heart of the story. I was working with a client on a short story, and they were struggling with their focus. And so I asked them, what is the heart of your story? Is the core something about redemption? Is it about forgiveness? Is it about betrayal? And I was kind of guessing based on what they'd written, what the core was really about. And they took that and they thought about it. And it was more the question than even the suggestions that helped. And they figured out that it was about being kind to yourself. And from that, they were able to realize what parts of their story were relevant and which parts weren't for the story that they wanted to tell. I wouldn't have known that if I'd just given them direct suggestion for changes. Okay, I do love this little graphic. I hope you enjoy it as well. Both of you should be comfortable. So you got to find your deal breakers, first of all. And that includes in terms of content. So you might ask about trigger or content warnings for the things that you're working on, or the subject matter at least. There may be some things you don't want to work on ever. There may be some things you don't want to work on right now. And I think it's important to honor yourself and your emotions and your physical and emotional state, and know what you can and can't do with that. Communication preferences. We're going to get into this more because it's so important, but what works for you and what doesn't? What can you not stand, and what is just makes you so much more able to do your best? Feedback. What kind of feedback do you give? What kind of feedback does the client want? And can you work together on that to find a middle ground? Red versus yellow flags. So what you consider red flags or yellow flags in a client or potential client may be vastly different from somebody else. So if you know what constitutes a red flag for you, saying, I don't want to work with this, this relationship is not comfortable, I can't work with them at all, versus, I don't love this, but we can move forward. That's really important for you to know. So on the client side of things, some ways that you can communicate with them ahead of time so they know based on their deal breakers. You can communicate on your website what you can and can't do, what you do and don't want to work on. Intake forms. So that's the next step if they actually reach out to you. Some people have intake forms on their website itself, some in email. That's how I do it. If you ask questions there and make statements there, then that can really help kind of weed out those that aren't going to be good clients for you. Initial communication, seeing how they treat you and how they speak to you and how you treat them, how you speak to them, that's all really important information. Rates. I know this is kind of a big debate in the editing community about whether or not to put your rates on your website or out in public. I personally don't, even though I go back and forth about it a lot, but at least early on in your communication, communicate ranges or hourly base or per word rate, however you do rates, helps both of you understand what is and isn't going to work for you both. All right. So ideally, our preferences and our tastes will match our clients perfectly, and we'll all be friends, and we'll be amazing every single time, and we're just endless joy in our work. And actually, it's not that that doesn't happen. It does happen, and it's amazing. That's some of the joy of working as an editor. But realistically, a lot of the time, you're going to have non-ideal fits and have difficult relationships, but you might still work together. And that might be because it's not that bad. It doesn't reach a deal breaker. And sometimes you need the work. Sometimes we can't always just pick and choose our favorites. That's absolutely a reality to understand in all of this, of course. And so if you know what your actual deal breakers are, that's going to help everybody. Okay, so this is the tale of the editor and the blatant isms. So I offer sample edits, and in a sample edit, this has actually happened multiple times, unfortunately, but I received pages that were filled with instances of sexism, of racism, of homophobia, just even the first 1,000 words or less. And I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable working on that. So I told them, no, we're not going to work together. This isn't going to work for me. Okay, communicate. This underlies so much of what I'm talking about, but it's good to talk about it directly as well. So asking about what form of communication works best. So it could be email that works for everybody, but even within email, you might prefer bullet points, or they might, or longer paragraphs for more information. I was talking with someone before we got this officially started and recording, but certain colors and fonts work for people with different kinds of brains and different kinds of abilities. So if you struggle with reading or vision, if you're colorblind, it all really depends. If certain fonts are difficult to read or easier to read, it's really important to establish that kind of thing to make sure that neither of you are needlessly struggling with this basic aspect. Some people prefer chat. That's maybe kind of an immediate way to keep talking to each other, with also building in that moment where you can, one or both, process what's going on and form your responses. Some people might prefer phone calls. It might be easier to just kind of talk and let the ideas flow, but not have to worry about facial expressions. And some might prefer video calls. It might be being able to see the facial expressions and interpret emotion, as well as having that flow of conversation, is easiest. You don't necessarily know, so it's always good to ask. And what form of communication doesn't work for you? Because again, this is both of you working together. If the client's preferred style causes you anxiety, extra masking, which can be wildly uncomfortable, exhaustion, or any kind of damage, really. If it causes you any kind of damage, see if there's a style that suits you both. Just because a client prefers it and you ask, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to work that way together. Okay, so I call this 100 years of, what was that? I don't work well on phone calls. I can do it with friends casually, but in an official work setting where I need to pay a lot of attention and notice the details, I really struggle with it. I can do email, I can do video calls. I do a lot, especially with my coaching clients, face-to-face, on either in person or on video. It helps me concentrate, but on a phone call, my mind starts to wander. I don't focus as much. It's just harder for me. So if I have a client who only wants to talk on the phone, I might pass them on to somebody else because it's not going to be a good fit. Okay, I had a whole lot of fun with this graphic. I hope you enjoy it as well. It's important to not assume. So to paraphrase the author, Catherine May, she came to speak at the CIEP conference a couple of years ago and was absolutely marvelous. I absolutely recommend you check her out. Each autistic person is their own galaxy. It's not just a spectrum. There are so many differences and individualities. And the same can be said of the neurodivergent umbrella, really. So don't take action based on someone's diagnosis, whether it's confirmed or you've assumed it, or you're trying to piece together the puzzles based on some interactions or their writing or their self-diagnosis. Interacting with them on that level just leads to more miscommunication. So also keep in mind, your clients might be neurodivergent and want to disclose it to you, and that you can have that discussion. They might be neurodivergent and not want to disclose it to you. They can be neurodivergent and not even know it. And they can be neurodivergent and just not know every part of it. They could even be neurotypical. I'm told they still exist. I don't know. Okay, so this is even outside of the work context for me, the saga of the well-meaning insults. And this has happened to me all my life. To this day, people saying, you can't be ADHD, or I'd never guess that of you, or squirrel, right? Squirrel moment. But those all are based on assumptions of what ADHD looks like. It's based on assumptions of how they think I operate and how they think I'm feeling and how I'm thinking based on how I'm presenting, which, as a lot of you I'm sure know, involves a lot of masking. Even though I'm working on unmasking, but it's a difficult, long process, and especially hard in professional space. And they make these assumptions that hurt, even with the best of intentions. And it's just uncomfortable for everybody. Okay, so we've touched on this a little bit. Expect compromise. With two different neurotypes, even within the same neurotype, you may not agree on several aspects of the editing process. So expect to make compromises anywhere from the communication to the edits, suggested changes, all of that. So here are a few examples, some of which we've touched on a little bit. Maybe the editor prefers email and the client prefers the phone. See if you can text or chat to communicate. Maybe the editor prefers to write blunt queries in the stories, in the work, and the client prefers gentle ones. See if you as the editor can soften your tone in your queries and add more compliments. And that may or may not be possible, or it can be difficult, but see if that's possible. Maybe the editor likes to write long emails and the client has trouble with lots of text. So some things you can do: add bullet points, subheadings, bolded information to emails, all of that, and more, right? These are just a few ideas with a few examples. There's an infinite number of ways to go about this. So I promise this is not a, voice notes, yeah. Good note, thank you. This is not an actual quote that I said to an author, I promise. But really, I have been working for years to go from more blunt to more gentle because it was not having the intended effects that I wanted on my clients. I didn't want to make anybody cry. I just wanted to help them find their way to their best story. So for years, I've been working on shifting that to try to get the right balance. And I'm sure I still struggle with it, but it's ongoing work. Okay, so I get really excited about this section, finding differences within the text itself. So the actual writing of neurodivergent writers could actually be different, and sometimes is. And I feel like this is something that feels obvious, but isn't necessarily until you start seeing it. It's one of those things. So this example from Virginia Woolf, who I absolutely love, and I think I've spotted a typo. Sorry, guys. Sorry, everybody. So between these two arrows, that is a single sentence. And I'll read it, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. I am alone, she cried, by the fountain in Regent's Park, staring at the Indian and his cross, as perhaps at midnight, when all boundaries are lost, the country reverts to its ancient shape as the Romans saw it, lying cloudy when they landed, and the hills had no names, and rivers wound they knew not where. Such was her darkness. When suddenly, as if a shelf were shot forth and she stood on it, she said how she was his wife, married years ago in Milan, his wife, and would never, never tell that he was mad. Now, the reason I picked this is it's such a long sentence with so much punctuation. And we know that Virginia Woolf was neurodivergent. Wasn't described as neurodivergent because that's a new term, and under today's diagnostics, right? It was something different, but she absolutely had a brain that worked differently. And here's this absolutely gorgeous piece of writing that, if it fit with neurotypical expectations of writing and grammar and punctuation, would have taken out so much of the effect here. Oh, yeah, that's a terrible speech to text one. Yeah, apparently we really need to work more on neurodivergent being recognized. Okay, it worked that time. Thanks, Elizabeth. So this was 1925. This is from 2023. Now, this is from a memoir of a wonderful neurodivergent childhood, from a memoir called Plums for Months by Zaji Cox. And I will read this little clip as well. Mixed with black, the deep evening blue frames the down the street neighbor's driveway, his army green truck shining as it reflects the streetlight. Leaves arch over our heads as my sister and I wait in the car, watching our mom's steps strong with "my daughter" go up to the man's door. Too far to hear, we see the calm inside her work to guide and tame the anger, tame the "my daughter" to a volume that won't shake the trees with the white noise of woman yell. And I love this because it's so poetic. It's so poetic in the prose, and it leans heavily on physical and color descriptions and all these things. And it's beautiful. I recommend it, obviously. But this is a neurodivergent writer. In a neurotypical expectation, some of this could have been edited out or shifted to take the voice out. And that would lose so much of this gorgeous writing. And so I think, especially as editors, it's important to realize, even when we are neurodivergent, that we don't want to take the neurodivergence out of the writing that we're working on. I love this. I get so excited. Okay, so some of the many ways you can find differences in the text. Exactly, don't mess with the voice. Story structure. The structure itself may not follow the 3 or 5 act structure. It may not follow the hero's journey, right? Those are very specific Western, modern, kind of contexts. So that may shift. That may not be what they're intending to do with their story. Punctuation usage. As someone with ADHD, I love a good em dash. I really enjoy parenthetical statements. I might enjoy some semicolons as well. Not quite as much, but they're fantastic. So, that's not wrong. It can get overwhelming, and that's where editors come in. Editors need editors. But playing with that, there's nothing wrong with playing with that. I'm getting some support in the comments. Awesome. Sentence structure. Maybe it needs to be different. Maybe that's what the writer wants to do. Maybe it feels unclear to certain people, but it will be a revelation to others. And if you like Virginia Woolf's style and have never read The Waves, go read it. It's difficult until you understand how it's structured. Blew my mind, absolutely. Setting. I think this is fascinating. I once had a neurodivergent client say that they needed to build a room before their character could walk in. And I loved it. It was gorgeous. And so instead of saying this is too much setting or it's info dumping or too much detail, maybe that's what they want. Maybe that's part of the story. Okay, so this is mine from Work in Progress. So speaking of Let's Get Personal, this is the novelist as a young-ish woman. Okay, I'll just read this to you. Her mouth filled with burning, with bright, with power, and then a star the size of an egg emerged from between her lips. She held it up with the tips of her fingers, trying hard not to let it burn her palm, and held it above her head. The frog flew out of Wen's mouth and wrapped his little legs around the star. Instantly, he was vaporized. Now, I'm not going to say this is brilliant writing, and I'm not going to say it's not going to change or get edited in future versions of itself, but I am going to say it's weird. It's weird writing, and I really enjoy writing in strange ways, and I don't want that to be buffed out when it gets edited. That would be so sad for me. It's part of the fun. Okay, so now we're moving on to the last section, which is so important. And I think, especially if you're neurodivergent, especially if you are trying so hard as an editor to be kind, to be understanding, to really push yourself, and be there for your clients, I think it can be really hard to guard your boundaries. But only you can know them and only you can guard them. So it's an essential part, I think, of the work. Okay, so some ways to do it. Sorry, I'll get back. Yes, nonfiction. If you write nonfiction, you would write differently. Yes, absolutely. And again, that depends on the kind of nonfiction, if it's academia, what the style expectation is, etc. Sorry, we'll get back to more Q&A at the end. But yeah, okay, so scope creep. A lot of you probably know what scope creep is, but just in case you don't, scope creep is when you set a certain expectation in your services, in your contract, in your agreement, and maybe you say, I'll do one pass, and then a client comes back and says, I just have 10 to 20 little questions if you can just answer them all in depth. Or they say, can you just quickly look over this? Again, but I'm not going to actually pay you for it. It ends up, you agree to one thing and you want your clients to be happy. You want to have good reviews. You want to have good relationships. And let's be honest, you don't get into editing to become a billionaire. It's because we love what we do. So by and large, I can't say that's everyone's reason, but so we want that but if you have the scope creep, then the client expects different things and you're probably exhausted and overworked and underpaid, and it's not good for anybody. Define your services, especially among editors. Definitions can be different, even from editor to editor or country to country. It can be very confusing. So the more you define your services and the more specific you get, the better everyone will know exactly what you will and won't be doing. Use intake forms. This is not a hard and fast rule, but I really enjoy them. Over the years, it's only gotten longer, really, with the questions, and it helps me to learn so much up front about the writer, about their process, about their journey, about their boundaries. So I really like using that. And know your limits. This goes back to your deal breakers, right? How much can you work and for how long? And for a lot of us, brain fog, energy levels, disability, all these things can really come together to make it difficult to accurately know that. But it's also an ongoing journey. The more you learn, the more you get attuned, and the better you'll know your limits and be able to tell people when this is not okay, I'm not okay with this, and know when to walk away. Because as hard as it is, especially financially, especially if work has gotten slow, if something is a red flag, if you can't find the compromise, if it's causing you damage, if at all possible, you might need to cut ties. So here is my last Let's Get Personal one. So I did a chat with a potential new client, and they basically didn't let me finish any of my sentences. even as I was trying to describe my services, talk to them about their work and how I work and how we can work together, they didn't let me finish pretty much ever. So at the end of the conversation, they said, great, let's work together. And I said, no, this is not going to work for me because you're not going to listen to me. And I'm going to be so frustrated. So this is not going to be a good relationship. So this summation of all of this is the 3 C's: care, communication, and collaboration. Care is not just for the client, it's also for you. You need to take care of yourself. Clear communication as much as possible helps everybody, and collaborate with your clients because they are creating something which is amazing, and it's fantastic to figure out how you can best work together, what they need, what you need, and everything. Oh, yeah, Marnie. So this is the last slide. Thank you for listening to me. We're about to get into Q&A so I can pay more attention to the chat. I do have a very in-depth online course coming soon, as I mentioned at the beginning. It's called Reducing the Barriers, Helping Neurodivergent Writers Through the Writing and Publishing Process. It's a hefty 4-part course. I will also be offering it in individual modules separately, so you can take and leave what actually will help you. I have a fun little QR code because apparently I'm fancy / someone just told me I can do this. And you can scan it to go to my website, literarylaura.com. And on the courses worksheets page, you can find a sign-up sheet. I will let you know when it's coming out. You're not signing up for anything yet. There's no, promises made, but I will let you know when it's out and ready for signups, and hopefully sooner rather than later. So thank you, everybody. That's awesome. We have, I believe, 10 minutes left for the Q&A section. I'll just leave this slide up in case anyone wants to know. And okay, I'm going to look at the chat now. I don't know if I missed any actual questions. So if you have questions, now is a good time to ask. Okay, let's see. Kath said, sample edits can be so great for making sure your service is aligned with their expectation. If a client doesn't ask for a sample edit, I still send a calibration check soon after starting, after the first couple of chapters, and tell them to let me know if this was what they were expecting and if they'd like me to do more of something or less of something. I love that. That's fantastic. Marnie just had a super interrupter as a client. Yeah. First time I really felt a serious clash. Very difficult to even get myself to do the work because the lack of good will engender. Yeah, absolutely. It's really frustrating. Share some examples of the kinds of questions you put on the client intake form from Hannah. Yes, I can do that. So some of the things I include, besides basics like word count, genre, summary of the story, I like to include a question about trigger warnings. And there's this Tumblr post that's a really, really good inclusive list of like everything that could possibly be a trigger or content warning. And very, very rarely have I not worked with someone based on that. But if they're not willing to answer that question, then we may not be the right fit as editor and client, because I'm very interested in conscious language and making sure that we are doing no harm. I'll also ask about if they've had any previous revisions. I'll ask about strengths and weaknesses in their writing from their perception. That kind of tells me a lot. I ask about preferred communication and accommodations if they want to let me know. That kind of helps up front establish how we're talking. I hope that's helpful. Okay, now scroll down. Marnie, I got some things, thank you. Question for fiction editors. I usually edit academic work, but every once in a while, a friend asks me to edit a work of fiction or other more creative work. What do you see as the job of an editor in fiction vis-a-vis maintaining voice versus advocating for the reader? Oh, yeah. I think that's, other people are free to jump in and answer as well, but I think it's really about probably you have more room for voice in fiction, I would think. I don't really do academic. But as long as you as the reader can understand fairly well, And I think there's room for there to be other readers. So you might be able to say, listen, I didn't understand this. Here's some suggestions. Let's talk about where you want this to land for readers. Because I might think something, for example, one of my preferred styles in fiction is subtlety. I like subtlety. I like little hints here and there. I don't like to be hit upside the head with lots and lots of repetition, but that's how I see it. And I've had clients who prefer to have things more well laid out. And that doesn't mean it's bad writing or that I'm wrong for wanting more subtlety. It's really just a difference in preference. So when they know where they want to be on that scale, I hope that answered the question. Heather said, essentially reducing things that pull the reader out of a reading. Alexis has said, that's a question. Okay, excellent. No problem, Marnie. Alexis has asked, how have you come to terms with basically charging extra for customization? I'm pretty good at being diplomatic, showing I understand, or I'm trying to understand their intention, etc. In fact, my default mode is loss of nuance and attempts at gentleness, but it takes a lot of time. It's hard to charge for this, but I know I have to. I need to pay rent after all. Yeah, honestly, I've gone back and forth so much with the ways I want to set my rates, and I've just never moved away from hourly because of that reason. So basically, I tell them this is how much time I think it's going to take. And then if they want to have a 2-hour consultation afterwards, something like that, I'm getting paid for that separately. So they know the more we work together, the more expensive it's going to be. But yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. And sometimes you'll want flat rates, and I'm much more comfortable with that. And rates are really hard. I hope that was at least a little helpful. That's what I do. Yeah. Okay, that was a bit, sorry. Yeah, I think, okay, the other part of that is I think that the more you communicate, the better, because I think a lot of writers don't understand what we do as editors, and they don't understand how much effort goes into everything we do, right? Like on the developmental side, my clients probably don't think about the fact that I might be making lunch and then just stop for 10 minutes, stare into space, and think about how we can make their last 3 chapters flow better. And I'm not sitting down, writing that I'm charging for that time. I just, right? I might be going to sleep, trying to go to sleep, and I'm like, oh, that character needs to do this 3 chapters before, or switch these 2 instances around, and it all comes together. So I think maybe part of it is explaining, listen, I'm working really hard on your book. This is what I do. These are the things that you don't see. Yeah. Bolt up in bed. Susie must die. Exactly. Actually, and works in academic writing too. Perfect. One of the things that I like to say in a more casual way is that sometimes my job involves telling people more murder or less murder. Hopefully, usually that's in crime novels or fantasy or sci-fi. But yeah, Alexis, exactly. Lean into your natural urge to explain. Absolutely. There's a lot that clients don't see, and I think editors are this kind of like mysterious group of people that go behind a curtain and fix things. More murder works in academia too. I think that's maybe more difficult. More murder on academics would be worrisome. I agree. That maybe is a little more difficult, especially depending on the department and what you're writing about academia. Yeah, I'm talking to someone earlier about how, editor search engines and search results, they can get a little dicey. The laughs are about more murder, less murder. Okay. Awesome. Puts a whole new spin on the interrupter. Yeah, exactly. Not a good fit. Yeah, we've only got a few more minutes to wrap up, but if there are more questions or anything, I feel like we're starting to just chat, which is lovely, but if there are no more questions, I might work on stopping the recording. Does that sound? Well, someone else is going to do that, but I'll stop sharing the screen. Does that sound good? Thank you everyone for coming. This was a lot of fun, and I love chatting with you all. And I'm going to go to the other part of the room, and I'll be here if anyone wants to chat or ask questions or share stories, really anything. So thank you, everybody.